Hi, everybody. Jennifer Schaus here, coming to you live today from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us in our Webinar Wednesday series. And today we are continuing on in the FAR supplement. As you guys know, it's a complimentary webinar series, again, Wednesdays at 12 o'clock. Quick blurb about us. We are based in downtown D.C., provide consulting services for government contractors that are selling products, services, or software, primarily helping them with market analysis reports and GSA schedules. There's other services that we provide, which you can find on our website. A little bit about our webinars and newsletters. The newsletter, which is perhaps how you found out about today's webinar, now reaches over 23,000 federal contractors. We do have options there to advertise. We also now have, as of earlier this year, over 500 complimentary webinars, all on government contracting topics on our YouTube channel. You can search there for basically anything and everything related to government contracting. And you can also find them probably a little bit easier on our website under the Webinars tab. It allows you to search by topic. Our webinars do also offer sponsorship opportunities. If you want pricing on any of those options, just shoot us an email to the hello@jenniferschaus.com. So just a quick background. In 2020, we covered 52 parts of the FAR. We did one a week. And then in 2021, we covered the DFARs. We covered those once a week as well, again with guest speakers. So we decided to close out the whole loop here and continuing on with the FAR supplements. Again, these are complimentary, recorded. You'll get today's recording, which again you'll find on our YouTube channel and on our website. And the FAR regulations are basically covering department and agency procurement rules and nuances. Our speakers specifically today are government contracts attorneys. Sometimes we've got subject matter experts and accountants. And so we appreciate their time that they took to prepare the material and then the time that they're going to take to be with us today. This is the full schedule for the Wednesdays. Kind of if you see in the first box on your left-hand side where we are today is the Army. Next week we'll cover the Air Force. And then we'll close out on August 24th with the Veterans Affairs. What happens then on Fridays is we've got the corresponding playbook. So these are sales and business development playbooks. So this Friday, we're going to cover the doing business with the Army, otherwise known as the Army Playbook. We've got guest speakers. It's a panel discussion with our friends over at FedMind who will be discussing business opportunities. We'll have somebody from the federal government agency, usually the Small Business Office, talking about best practices, any agency events or matchmaking, whether it's online or in person that they have. And then our friends over at the McLean Group who will talk about M&A activity within the top contractors for that particular agency or department. Again, those are complimentary as well. So whatever we're covering on Wednesday, that Friday has the corresponding playbook. Okay, we also want to thank our sponsors, the Virginia PTech, which is the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. They're an online and in-person resource for small business and burgeoning government contractors. They offer one-on-one counseling, training. They've got a great training calendar. And I'd also encourage anybody on the line to reach out to them for any additional assistance that you might need with government contracting. So thanks to the Virginia PTech. We also want to thank the Federal Business Council. They are a resource for virtual as well as in-person events at government agencies. They put on the annual procurement fair every year in April, and we want to thank them for their participation today as well. Okay, so today, as you guys know, the purpose of why we're here today is to cover the FAR supplement on the Army. And so without further ado, we've got two speakers today, both from the same law firm. We've got Nicole Potroff and John Holt. So Nicole, thank you for being with us today. I'll let you chime in and say a few words, and I'll pop over to John's slide and then let you guys get started.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Yes. So my name is Nicole Potroff. I'm an equity partner at Co-Prince McCall and Potroff. We are a boutique law firm located in Lawrence, Kansas, and we exclusively do federal government contracting. So, you know, AFARs and the FAR and the DFARs and all of that are definitely within our wheelhouse and our limited wheelhouse, but we keep it government contracting, and we are excited to be here today. So thank you for having us, and I will let you introduce John.
Great, and thanks, Nicole. And John, over to you.
Hi, yes, my name is John Holtz. I'm an associate here at Coburn's McCall Potroff, and just like Nicole said, yes, we specialize in government contracting. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Great, and thank you both for the quick introduction. I've got your first slide up, so just let me know whenever you're ready for your next one.
All right. Okay, so yeah, as Jennifer said, we are going to be talking about the AFARs today. This is the Army's Essential FAR Supplement. These are the Army's procurement rules, and it's important to know that these are in addition to the FAR. These are not a replacement for the FAR. You're not subject to these instead of the FAR. It is they work together cohesively. Those are the set of regulations that you would be subject to, and they are found in FAR Chapter 51. And although the Army does make, you know, other deviations from the FAR, you know, these are the general rules. So you kind of want to make sure that you're not subject to other deviations, but these are the ones that are the standard, the baseline. These are for the agencies and Army officials. Most of these are directed toward the Army itself, but it is important that we look at those as well. We know what they're subject to, as well as what we as the offers contractors are subject to. And the parts that we're going to talk today are mainly those ones that pertain to the offerers. They're not necessarily the ones the agencies are subject to. But of course, when you're performing a Army contract, you're going to want to be aware of all of those, know what the agency's duties are under the AFARs, as well as what your duties are and what your responsibilities are. So it's important to kind of keep a broad knowledge of this if you are a contractor that commonly performs for the Army. Let's go to the next slide. All right, the FAR, DFARs, and AFARs. So FAR, I mentioned this a few times, but never actually explained it, is the Federal Acquisition Regulations. I'm sure most people are familiar with these, but you know, let's see, maybe we have some brand new to government contracting people. These are the big government contracting rules. They cover everything. They're in section 48 of the CFR, and they cover everything from, you know, how to submit proposals, like what the rules are regarding proposal submissions, what the evaluation rules are, all the way to what are the rules governing protests, things like that. You also have the GAO rules separate from the FAR, but the FAR covers a wide variety of federal contracting matters. And then the DFARs would be the supplement to the FAR that covers all Department of Defense contracts. So you've got the big apple of the FAR, and then you've got a bite of the apple, which is the DFARs, and then an even smaller bite of that apple would be the AFARs, and that is specific to the Army. So as you can see here, we've kind of put it as a nesting doll here. It's one inside the other, and you start with the FAR. A little section of the FAR is going to be the DFARs, and then a little section of the DFARs is going to be the AFARs. And again, it is not that one of these governs instead of the other. It is that one governs kind of inside of the bubble of the other, just like this nesting doll analogy here. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So in general, the AFARs is about the procedures that the Army and the contracting officers and the other contracting officials are going to need to follow rather than the offers. We talked about that a little bit. The AFARs does have competition requirements. Those are going to be in Part 5106. And they typically talk about, you know, which officials have the authority to make the justifications for certain other than full and open competition, things like sole source or you know, simplified competition, things that's not just wide open. And then the AFARs also requires the Army agencies to have advocates for competition. This is basically kind of an audit, making sure the competition is fair, is being done within the lines of the Competition and Contracting Act, which, if you're not familiar with, is the statute that governs most of the rules that are then kind of implemented through the FAR, making sure competition stays fair and there's justifications for everything the agency's doing and buying and how things are being done. And useful information in the AFARs, there's also addresses and contact information for certain divisions, so that can be a really helpful resource as well. Let's move on to the next section. All right, this covers 5109 to 5112. So 5109 discusses contractor qualifications, and the Army actually uses a robotic process automation bot to determine prospective contractor responsibility. So this is important because, you know, it's not necessarily a human being, and responsibility determinations are typically a, you know, go or don't go type of evaluation. Yes or no, you pass or you don't pass. But you can learn a little bit more about this online if you want to check it out. I looked into it because I was quite interested in these bots, and I would say the main reason this would come up is in the event of a protest where you feel that you were maybe improperly disqualified under responsibility or something. So it's important to kind of know what's going on there, so you know what you're up against when you're competing if you were to get rejected based on responsibility. So part 5110 briefly addresses the market research for agencies, you know, what the agency is required to do. For example, if the agency decides it's going to procure something from veteran-owned businesses, and it's going to have to show that, you know, there's a certain amount of veteran-owned businesses that are both interested and can reasonably offer a bid at a reasonable price. So there's the rules for market research are in there. And again, something that often comes up during protest, if you were to protest and say you feel that the agency, you know, isn't really aware of the, let's say, service disabled veteran-owned businesses that are able to do the work, and that it should have been set aside for those. That's where you would go to look at those rules and see if the agency followed them. Part 5111 explains how the Army agency should describe their requirements. So this is basically solicitations, requests for bids, requests for proposals, how the requirements should be described in there. And that's also important, again, not to harp on the protest issue, because clearly there's a lot of times you don't even need a protest, and it's still very important to know what's in your solicitation. But if you were looking to see how an agency described a certain requirement and thought maybe there was a mistake or something that nobody could meet a certain requirement, overly restrictive, that would be a good place to go look and find out if you think the agency in solicitation had lined up with the rules there. And then part 5112 goes over the acquisition of commercial items. So if you are a contractor that sells commercial items, that would be your section, your go-to to go check out those rules. And then again, these really concern the contracting officers and Army's officials. But why are we talking about them? Well, again, protest and things like making sure if you were to file a claim or you were to file a protest, you want to know what the Army's responsibilities were here so that you know whether or not they were followed. And you can say, hey, I went to this section and it looks like procedure was or was not followed. That's the important way to go. All right, next slide. All right, part 5113 concerns the simplified acquisition procedures. So these are, you know, under the simplified acquisition threshold, that's, I believe, 250,000 still, but underneath of that would be, you know, the simplified procedures. You don't have to necessarily follow every single rule that the larger acquisition procedures have to follow. So go there if your solicitation says it's a simplified acquisition and find out what the kind of more limited rules are. And then this one also discusses the purchase guidelines, again, the rules under that threshold. And if you obtain a government commercial purchase card, your guidelines are here for the use of that card as well. I'll go to the next slide. All right, part 5114 and 5115. 5114 concerns the sealed bidding requirements for contracting officials. So if you're awarded a classified contract by the Army, this part says the contracting officer will advise you how to dispose of classified materials. That's a very important part of that. Otherwise, the sealed bidding requirements, those are going to be somewhat out of date sometimes, but if they do apply to your contract, you know, go check those out. A lot of times we are not seeing these in more recent acquisitions, but 5115 concerns contract by negotiation. This is much more common. There is also an Appendix AA to the AFAR's Army Source Selection Supplement, and this is really going to have a lot of the info on those source selection procedures for the typical contracts by negotiation. Part 5115 gives the government the right to duplicate, use, and disclose proprietary information if a contract is made as a result of unsolicited proposal. So be careful. That's a good one to be aware of and know the rules there. And we will move on to the next one. All right, part 51.16. This is the last part I'm going to talk about before I turn it over to John. This concerns the types of contracts. This is the differences: fixed price, the cost reimbursement, and there's several others. You can also, the larger section of the FAR talks a lot about these, but these are clearly the ones that are specific to the Army, and the different rules that go with each one, the different procedural rules. Mostly concerns the officials again, but worth noting, this is just an important takeaway that we found: if you have a cost plus award fee contract, in accordance with the section there, a contractor begins each evaluation period with 0% of the available award fee due and works to earn the evaluated fee for each evaluation period. So contractors do not begin with 100% of the available award fee and have deductions withdrawn to arrive at the elevated fee for each period. So again, may or may not be something that is applied to the contracts you are working on, but just one of those, good reasons to be aware of what is in the AFARs when you are performing work that is subject to the AFARs. And I will turn it over to John.
All right, thank you, Nicole. So yes, and then so to move on, we are going to now talk about part 5117, and that's concerns special contracting methods. Again, many of these are very specific to the contracting officers and officials, so you may, much of the AFARs you honestly may not actually, ever encounter yourself, but it will be something that it's good to have some familiarity with, not only because of the rules that apply to you, but having a familiarity with how the rules apply to contracting officers and the like can help you understand better just how these systems work. So with part 5117, with the exercise of options, the CEO, your contracting officer, will have additional requirements to the other regulations before they exercise options. For example, they may have to implement a quality assurance surveillance plan, which is basically just a very nice way of saying how the Army is going to keep an eye on you and how you perform during the contract. So just so you know, so that there may be some more red tape, for lack of a better word, that you deal with the Army's contracts than you would with, let's say, the Department of Transportation or something of the like. Again, that can be different. Each place has their own special regulations as well. But the armed forces generally do have a little bit more, I would say, again, red tape, for lack of a better word, when it comes to these sorts of things. And also describes an important aspect of Army contracting, and it's called job order contracting. We won't go into it much in detail because that would take a good amount of time of this presentation, probably more than that. But basically, it's a specific type of contract, and it's used for certain sustainment, restoration, and modernization projects at the installation level. So it's something just to keep an eye out if you work on those types of projects where you're helping to kind of renovate, old buildings, things of that nature, old systems, or you're updating, systems, that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that you might want to keep an eye out for, just so you're aware. Next slide, please. All right, part 5128 concerns bonds and insurance, and it's a fairly short section, and for the most part, again, it just generally just is for the contracting officers and the officials of the agency. One thing that's worth noting, if you have a cost reimbursement contract, let's say, if you have it with the Army, the contracting officer has the right to waive DFARS 228.3111. That section, if you go look at that section, it has certain insurance requirements for liability to third persons. So, in case some, heaven forbid, some accident, people who are not related, not involved in the contract, but, are injured or something like that, that sort of insurance, would cover that. That is not necessarily, that wouldn't be required through this part. Again, that only gives the contracting officer the right to waive it. They don't have to. So don't expect simply because you have a cost reimbursement contract, you don't need to get the insurance for liability to third persons. Just be aware that that's something that could happen. So next slide, please. Part 5132 discusses contract financing, and this one has a notable consideration for contractors, and it's specifically regarding what they would call unusual progress payments. So if something just seems, like something has greatly, diverged from the original plan or something, but it's legitimate, of course. If you have to request, progress payments for that, you have to provide your contracting officer with documentation showing your monthly cash flow, your estimated profit and loss statements for that same period, your most recent audited financial statements, and notice that means you need to provide all of these, and a description of significant events before or after preparation of financial statements that materially affected your company or statements. So things like, moments of, heaven forbid, but catastrophes, things like that. These are the sorts of things that this would apply to, as well as I could even foresee, certain fortunate things. For example, things, someone figures out a way to do something much faster and much cheaper, and you would still want to get paid though for the work. That would be this sort of situation here. So, next slide, please. Our AFAR's Part 5139 concerns how the Army acquires IT products and services. Again, this concerns how they go about doing it. So generally is more governing what they do, and it's not going to actually govern your proposal preparation stuff. But it's just important to know that the Army doesn't use this the systems necessary that the rest of the government uses. They use the computer hardware, enterprise software, and solutions program. So that's something you're going to want to be familiar. If you work in the IT field and you're like, hey, I want to go, start working with the Army, because obviously, the armed forces have some great contracts. Be aware that, you'll see this a lot with the armed forces, is many of their systems are different from the rest of the governments. And this is a case where the Army uses its own kind of IT program, so to speak. Now, of course, we could go into that, but that would be its own massive topic that isn't necessarily related to AFARs. So we're just going to let you know that just something to keep an eye on for if you're involved in the IT field with the Army. Next slide, please. Part 5143 concerns contract modifications. This is a very short section, but it's extremely important if you have an assertion of a claim. 5143.205 of the AFARs notes the contractor may change the period in which the contractor may assert a claim under the clause at 52.243 of the 3 of the FAR, which is changes in time and materials or labor hours, to a period less than 30 days. So that's important. If you have a contract under this, and there's some sort of change that to labor or things like that, and you have a claim that you can bring, normally the time would be something around 30 days. So keep in mind, if you're with the Army, look out and make sure that that's still the claim period. They could have changed it, and it's permitted by this rule. So that's something, because what you don't want to have happen is obviously is you have your claim and you're thinking, well, I've got 30 days, and then you submit it, let's say on the 25th day after you had it, you knew about it, and they say, nope, you had to submit it in 20 days, and then you're out of luck. So please do be aware of that. We don't want to see that, and we hate having to tell people, if they call in or like, hey, we had this problem and we have this claim, and then have to say like, well, if you look at the contract, unfortunately, that's just kind of how it is. So just be aware of that. Next slide, please. AFAR's Part 5149 concerns contract terminations. Again, much of the termination rules, the actual rules and how they, whether they would terminate for convenience or default, that's going to be really in the FAR. This mostly goes about certain procedures that the CEO and the agency has to follow. But there's one thing worth noting. Let's say you do get a contract terminated for default. I hope that doesn't ever happen. I know that's something that many of you do not want to have happen. But if it does happen and you've received a certificate of competency from the SBA, the CEO well, they can, but they should not terminate the contract unless they got prior written approval from the head of the agency. So if that's something you notice that, they didn't get that prior approval, it's something maybe worth bringing up that, they didn't follow the regulation. Now, again, that's a should there, not a must. So, obviously that gives them some wide range of discretion, but it's something still worth noting. Next slide, please. And then finally, with these, with the AFARs, you have the appendices at the end, and these you may want to look through on your own time just to kind of get a little more familiarity with some of the concepts. AA is the Army Source Selection Supplement. Basically gives some further details and guides for how contracting officers are to choose their sources and that sort of thing. BB is Management Control Evaluation Checklists. Again, kind of self-evident. It's basically for supervising how management's being done and things of that nature. CC is the Army's Procurement Management Review Program, basically how they kind of review their own abilities to manage and organize their procurements. DD is a subcontracting plan evaluation guide. Some of the contracts you are required to submit certain subcontracting plans, and having familiarity with this will help you kind of get a better idea of how to properly tailor those plans to meet the evaluation's needs. EE is the government purchasing card operating procedures. So if you have been given a card, which again, there's a lot of steps to that, but if you've been given that card and you have access to use that for expenditures, these are the sort of operating procedures you may want to familiarize yourself with. Plan for control of non-standard clauses. That's basically just a plan for if it's just some sort of sorts of guidelines for if the CEO needs to use a clause that is a little different or a diversion from the normal regulations, which is permitted. That's something just to keep it out there for them to follow. GG is delegations, basically just which agencies can do what and which which contracting officials can do what. Basically gives a kind of a rundown of that. Then HH is policy and PWS language. Basically, again, just kind of some more general guidelines and the AFARs in general. Really not applicable, I'd say, to any offers such as contractors such as yourselves, but it's something that it can't hurt to know these sorts of things. And so that's generally a kind of what you've got here is, yes, there's more obviously to the AFARs than what we went through, and because there's a lot of details, but also a lot of it is more things that affect contracting officials. So we didn't want to necessarily go through each time they mentioned that, oh, this official has to be the one that does this or something like that. But it's good to get a sense of these rules to be able to understand that, how the Army kind of works on these contracts and how they kind of go about things differently. And so we hope this has been a bit insightful for you on how the AFARs works, how it affects you, and how it affects Army procurements.
This was a great presentation. Thank you both, John and Nicole, and thanks to the audience for tuning in with us today to hear this great information. I think it's important to know the rules and regulations. Again, as I mentioned on Friday, we're going to cover the Playbook, which will have more information about bidding opportunities, trends in acquisition forecasts for the last couple of years, and kind of what's forward-looking, as well as M&A activity within the top contractors. So again, we do not take questions in these webinars just to keep them short and sweet. So if you guys have questions for either of our speakers, Nicole's information is here, and John's information is here. So please reach out to them. Usually within about 24 hours, usually less, we will get the recording and the slides over to everybody that has registered. It'll also be listed on our website and on our YouTube channel. So thanks for attending. I believe next week we're covering the Air Force. And again, if you've got questions, contact us or contact the speakers. And thank you, John, and thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate the information you guys provided today. It was excellent and completely on point.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Yeah, it was our pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, guys.